I'm the Assistant Director of Advising and Counseling, and I'm part of the care team. Normally, what we do as team will see is to look at our students and look at the behavior, the level of functionality, and try to assess them and get them the resources that we can. My background is counseling, so that's the area of the care team that tend to focus the most. And through working here at Trinity River, has also become advising. So if the student is also challenged because of mental health and some academic issue, we try to address that as well.
Yes, thank you, Geronimo. Um, if y'all have not had the opportunity to meet Geronimo, please make sure that you put that on your list of to-dos before you leave TCC. He's great, he's wonderful, and he does a really good job working with our students that are referred to the care team. So today we're really excited to inform you a little bit about what the care team is and how we can help you. I think that we are all, given the way in which we're engaging right now, pretty well aware that life happens outside of school, and our students can sometimes find themselves in crisis and in difficult situations. And so we want to make sure that we help you identify how we can support you, what are the roadblocks that we may experience sometimes when we encounter a situation in distress or crisis. But then we also want to do our best to help educate you about different warning signs and what are the different ways in which you can react yourself, because our goal is not for us to educate our teams about, let's just refer this and get it off our plate and not do anything about it. We also want this to be a partnership and give you some guidance, especially in those initial moments when maybe a student you encounter is in distress or crisis, on how you can react and what you can do. And then we'll talk a little bit more about overall what we can do as a community to set up a really, really good culture of reporting and support. So the CARE team, it's a really great acronym, but it actually does mean something. And we could just say we're the CARE team and it just mean that we care for all of our students, but it does have a deeper meaning, and it comes from CARE teams in general come from the approach of risk assessment and threat management. And they all started initially, obviously, with like Secret Service and FBI, assessing the risk and assessing the dangers of any given situation that they may find themselves in. And then back in 2007, after the Virginia Tech massacre, there was a really big government sanctioned investigation into those circumstances that led to that horrific tragedy. And one of the things that came out of that report from the state of Virginia was that it was identified specifically that Virginia Tech's behavioral intervention team should have been able to identify some of the warning signs and intervene in that situation. And Virginia Tech responded with, what is a behavioral intervention team? Because it wasn't a super common practice in the higher education setting. So after that, they obviously implemented one, and it began to spread throughout the nation. And it's now definitely a best practice for schools to have behavioral intervention teams specifically risking or assessing the risk that someone may pose to cause harm to themselves or others. So everything from suicide attempts to active shooters. But, we've expanded beyond that and really started focusing on those lower level behaviors when things are just, simmering really, really low level, basic needs insecurities, lack of access to mental health resources, things like that, and how those can down the road boil up into being one of those more greater threat situations. And so looking at the CARE team, we're here to consult, but we're here to assess the situation, provide resources, and educate our community and our students about what we can do to support them so that whatever's going on in their personal or their academic life can be addressed as soon as possible so that it doesn't hinder their ability to succeed either personally or academically. So the whole philosophy behind all of this is to take that proactive, preventative approach to behavioral intervention. So we want to make sure that our students and our community know what assistance we can provide, and then we want to establish and maintain consistent lines of communication between departments, because one of the key faults and one of the key areas where Virginia Tech really didn't succeed was that communication. That individual who engaged in those behaviors was having, what we call leakage in the area. So he was having behavior outbursts or having behaviors that were sending red flags up in several different departments all across campus. But none of those departments were coming together and connecting the dots. So everyone was trying to do their little bit to resolve their little situation. But had all the pieces been together, that institution likely would have been able to see that this is a greater issue and a greater matter that we need to address in a more cohesive fashion. And so that's kind of the philosophy behind it. But when it comes to the functionality, there is a process and there are steps we follow. And this looks chaotic, and I purposely chose a graphic that looks a little chaotic because when you're on the outside or when you're in a crisis situation, things can feel chaotic and things can feel like we don't have a clear path forward or we're not really sure what to do. But within that, when we have proper procedures in place, when we have really well-trained staff that know how to intervene, there is a path through all the chaos. And so the first thing we do is we gather information and we assess it. And we can't do that without all of you. It is our job to assess the information and refer it when we see it. But it's also all of our partners' jobs in the community to let us know when they're seeing signs of concern or distress, because without that, we don't have anything to react to. And you're often our first line of defense, because you're the individuals who are, the students are coming into your office to schedule appointments. The students are in your classroom when we are in person, or they're the ones engaging with your discussion board posts. And so it's really, really important that we look out for those behaviors, which we're going to walk through. After we get that information and we assess it, we do conduct a threat assessment, which we'll show you later. We then develop an action plan. We connect individuals to resources. We provide support and advice to all impacted faculty, staff, students, friends, family. And then we work to educate and empower our community to know what we do moving forward. When it comes to the care teams, like I said earlier, each of our physical campuses does have a care team of dedicated staff and faculty that are working on these situations. But we're all connecting and communicating. So a student sometimes is referred at the Northwest campus, but they maybe have had a previous referral at the Trinity River campus. We can see those different referrals, and the directors of student conduct and prevention education who lead the group are in constant communication with each other about those referrals. I think, as many as you know, also several of our students attend multiple campuses at once. And so we are all very, very much connected, but we do have our dedicated group. It is comprised of a variety of different campus partners, and it looks a little different in terms of the actual individuals on the campus, depending on what campus you are on, because we have some unique characteristics. So as you can see, the Vice President for Student Development Services, that's a very specific person and position on each campus, and they are always on the team because they serve as the co-chair with the director. The SAR coordinator, which is Student Accessibility Resources, is on the team. We have a police presence. That's one of the areas where it may vary a little bit. Most of the campuses just have one police officer, but for example, Trinity River, we have two, and that's because our campus is split. And so we have our main campus, and then we have the campus that is further east down the street, where that typically is referred to as TREC. ANC stands for Advising and Counseling Team. So all of our teams have a director of counseling on it, but some of them also have a counselor or the assistant director. Student development, we have representation from either our director of student development services, student activities, health services. Any one of those individuals will serve on the team, as well as academic affairs. All of our teams have academic affairs representatives on it. Typically, it's a dean from the campus. Some have a dean and a faculty member as well. And we all work together to coordinate and communicate. Geronimo, you jump in if there's anything you want to add. But for everyone who is participating, we're going to do a little quick response here. So as you can see at the top, there is a URL that you can go to, or if you have your cell phone available and you just want to send a text message, you can text Tim Kaysen 419-237-6966. 607 or go to pollev.com/timcason419. And I just want to start off by having you all provide me with a few examples of what might be a reason why someone would not submit a care team report. Why would we initially be hesitant to do that? Give y'all a couple minutes or couple seconds, sorry. Not sure if it warrants a report, fear that the student of student retribution or retaliation. Yeah, that's a perfect example and often a concern. Embarrassment or shame, privacy concerns. I see that in the chat. Yeah, not sure how. So those are all very legitimate, very common things that we encounter. So hopefully, I want you to remember in the back of your head, what are some of the things we're seeing right here on this slide, as well as what are some things that other people see that you resonate with, and keep those in the back of your head, because hopefully I know that this presentation addresses all of these, but if for some reason you don't feel like we emphasized it enough, or if you want us to dive deeper at any point in time, like just jump in, turn off your microphone and speak, or you can put questions in the chat and we'll do our best to moderate that and get your questions answered. So failure to keep the report is confidential, and so the student may find out who told on them for sure, or just what qualifies for sure. All very legitimate things. So we're gonna go ahead and advance now and talk. I want to lay the groundwork for this conversation. Yeah, Aaron, exactly. Scared might be a thing too. When it comes to our different behavioral levels, it's really important to know that there are pretty good distinctions between what type we're seeing and how often we're seeing what type, and they can kind of fall into this pyramid aspect. So at the very, very bottom of that pyramid, we put our concerning behavior, which we're going to define and walk through. It then starts to elevate a little higher into maybe disruptive behavior. And then at the very, very top of that pyramid is threatening behavior. The pyramid is a perfect analogy for this, and it's purposely chosen because you can't have threatening behavior without first having had concerning or disruptive behavior. Statistically speaking, of course, there are in very, very few instances, and I don't have the exact statistic off the top of my head, but I know that it's less than 10% of threatening behaviors are the kind that are just like a light switch that happen out of nowhere, and it's incredibly rare. The majority of the time, we're having those situations where a student has already engaged in behaviors that would be considered either concerning or disruptive in some way, and they've had leakage is what we recall it. So things are spilling out or leaking along the way before we reach that threatening area. It's important, though, that we focus on when and how do we report those lower level ones, because we want to intervene as early and often as possible at the lowest level, because low level intervention prevents high level issues. And I can say that this is definitely something that is very is followed here at TCC. We have a great reporting culture, and more than 90% of the behaviors that we get reported to us definitely fall within that concerning, maybe a little of the disruptive category, and very, very, very rarely are we actually seeing those threatening behaviors. And I think it's because we have a lot of people reporting, so we can intervene often, but it's also, and that's going to be a continued effort. We always need to make sure that we're reporting. So let's transition. We're going to first talk about concerning. So that's the bottom part of that pyramid, the thing that kind of builds the foundation. And this is by far the largest piece of that pyramid as well. And these are behaviors that cause us to feel alarmed, upset, or worried about a person's well-being. And so that's what we are defining as concerning behavior. The different examples may be if the individual has an inability to get along with others. Maybe, you know, they're not saying anything that's crazy offensive or anything like that. They're just difficult. Maybe, you know, some may call them a jerk, or they may just create some distance between themselves and their classmates. That might be an indication of a concerning behavior because it causes us to feel some type of alarm, even if small. Poor personal boundaries, or even, you know, poor personal hygiene might be an indication of concerning behavior, because we're looking at this too, not only as like, what are the behaviors that cause us to assume that a person's crazy, but what are the behaviors that cause us to feel concerned? So is someone homeless? Are they experiencing food insecurity? Are they they don't have access to financial resources to purchase their books? Those are all things that may cause us to feel concerned for someone, and if not addressed, could lead to greater issues. If an individual is tearful, irritable, they have excessive absences or tardies, they have disjointed thought, or maybe I think that this really all kind of centers around the fact, though, of a change in behavior. And so thanks for highlighting that, Dr. Amen, in the chat. And it's about first obviously having to establish what is the student's baseline. And so if the student is really engaged and they're turning in work, even if it's not A+ work, you know, they're actively following timelines and getting things turned in, and then they just fall off the face of the earth, or they just start missing a lot of deadlines, and then that's when we're seeing it. It's about getting to know our students and their situation, so you see what's their norm, and then when from that norm. So what would y'all say? Let's hear maybe from just like one or two people in the chat. If you encountered a student with any of the displaying any of these behaviors, what would be something that you could or would do? You can turn off your microphone or put it in the chat. Could also call on people, which might be more of a red flag for our TR friends, since I'm Daniel Hopkins, thank you so much. Yes, so if y'all can see that in the chat, Daniel typed, I would talk to the student first, let them know that I've observed a change in behavior. Aaron put in there, remind them about their options that are available to them, and if they have any questions, to email you privately. I think that those two are very perfect ways to engage in this situation, and that's exactly what would be an expectation in those regards, because again, these are low-level situations. They're kind of just that first sign there may be something off or something that needs to be addressed, but you want the student to know that you care. And that's one thing that's important. You know, I've worked in this field for many years at 3 different institutions, and I can count on less than one hand, you know, like 1 or 2 people that have ever truly been upset across any institution over the years by a care team referral. Because at the end of the day, it's about having those non-confrontational approaches to students to let them know that you're there to support them and that we have resources because we want them to be successful. And so initiating in those private, non-confrontational conversations about what you've observed and what behavior concerns you have, that would be really helpful, because then it helps the student understand that you're seeing them, and it helps them understand that you care because you cared so much that you were able to notice a difference. And that's oftentimes what people need. And so those conversations can be emails, they can be phone calls, If you are nervous about using your personal device, I know I don't, you can always set up a Google Voice phone number, which is basically like a phone number that's you, but it's not your direct personal line, and it can change. You can also just set up meetings with them in Teams and things of that nature. And then Geronimo, do you want to jump in and expand a little bit on the point in the chat?
Yes, I was just going to say that when you see like the concerning behavior that can be observed if you connect with the student, this is the time where the student readiness to get and connect with resources is easy to get them to connect with them. As we move and escalate, sadly, the student may feel overwhelmed or a little defensive to connect with those resources. So the sooner that we reach our students when we see behavior that has changed based on their level of functionality, emotional state, or boundaries, the easier it's them to get them back to a regular behavior as before.
Absolutely. I think that that's perfect. So an analogy I like to use is like a car analogy. You know, if maybe your low tire pressure light comes on, it's really easy to address that pretty early on. But if we wait for the low pressure light to come on, as well as your oil change light, as well as the check engine light, and then something starts rattling, these are all things that individually we could have probably resolved quicker. But because we waited, it got ignored, whatever the circumstances is, it makes it a lot more difficult, a lot more stressful to take care of it all at once. And so applying that to this same space is a really good example. If you know of resources that do exist, like our counseling department or our library resources, it's awesome to share that information with the student. But I also think that it's really important to acknowledge when you maybe don't have all the answers, and also know that you're going to make a care team report. So letting the student know, like, I'm sorry to hear about your circumstances. Please know that we have counselors available to our students. You can also access resources here at XYZ, but I'm also going to make a referral to our campus care team. They're a great, group of individuals that can work and follow up with you to determine if there's any other services or help that we can provide. And that is the very big difference between a cold call from a care team member and then a warm handoff to the care team member. And it makes it make more sense that we reach out. So make sure you definitely. Go ahead.
But one thing that I would like to add is there may be times where you connect the student with resources, the student seems to be okay. I will still do the care team for one reason. It allows us to see a pattern, to put a context. So if the student is having difficulty on another time, we already know the student struggles, and we will be able to understand where the student is coming from, or if this is a pattern that the student has that will allow us to connect and join the student to provide a better service for the student's sake.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that, Geronimo. The goal, like he said, is to track a pattern of behavior. And so even if you provide resources, the student says, I'm all good from here, thanks, it's still awesome to put a care team report in, because then to paint a fuller picture of the context around that student, and we have more information for the potential next report that comes in, and having that history in our pocket helps. Thank you. So moving on to disruptive behavior. Again, I'm just going to kind of keep flowing through this, but if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat, and I'll stop and answer them. But if not, I'm going to just keep going. That next stage of the pyramid, so a little bit higher up, but definitely a smaller slice of that concerning behavior, would be disruptive behavior. And these are things that we identify as behaviors that interfere or interrupt with a student's functioning or the normal functioning of the college. So this isn't just like standing up and yelling in class and things like that. These are also like things that may be disruptive to the student themselves and their ability to succeed, or other students and their ability to succeed. Even if it doesn't, if it's individually, it may not have an impact on other students, but it definitely is something that might impact that individual of concern's ability to progress. So some things that may fall in this category are low level abuse or harassment. And so these are things, there's a very big difference But it can also be a fine line. So I totally hear you in terms of what are things that are, disruptive versus threatening, or what are things that make us feel threatened versus actually being threatened. And it's all part of a bigger piece of the, it's all part of the picture. It doesn't excuse any type of behavior, but it does allow us to figure out where it falls on the risk levels. And so the situations that might be a little bit lower level of abuse, indirect type things or harassment, are things that would definitely be considered disruptive. Things like intimidation or vague threats. One thing I like to say is, or an example I like to give is, there was a situation at one of my previous institutions where I suspended a student, and the student didn't want to comply with the mandated requirements of them through that conduct process. And so they weren't allowed to re-enroll or weren't allowed to come back on campus until they completed those items. But every now the student changed the phone numbers a lot. They had sporadic access to basic needs. They were also dealing with a lot of mental health concerns, and they would randomly call our office from random different numbers, but we recognized the voice and started to recognize them. And they would ask my administrative assistant to speak with Mr. Kaysen, and administrative assistant, whatever reason, he's not available right now. He's in a meeting. Can I ask who's calling? And the student wouldn't give their information about who was calling or why they wanted to call. And so she was like, well, I can't connect you right now, but I can take a message. Would you like me to take a message for you? And tell him what this is regarding. And the student, without question, would always reply with, I'm going to let him find out what it's about, and then hang up. And I mean, that's definitely intimidating. It's very vague. It makes you have this ominous feeling that something's going to happen, but there's no real specifics to it, right? It's not like the student said, I'll meet you in the F1 parking lot at your red car in spot 3 with a baseball bat at 4 p.m. It's just meant to cause that concern and cause that fear. Yes, heebie-jeebies, I think, is the technical term for it. If the student maybe refuses to respond to limitations and guidance, whether that's in like a virtual discussion board post of how to engage appropriately or in person, those are things that may be considered disruptive. If they're physically harming themselves or cutting, that might be considered this. Or if they verbalize a thought of self-harm or have outbursts in class, those are all things that would kind of fall in this middle category. So what would you say, all? What would be one thing that you could potentially do in a situation if you encountered a student who's engaging in disruptive behavior? What would you say is maybe 1 or 2 options? Feel free to turn your mic off or put it in the chat.
I would just casually just try not to make it too obvious to them, because obviously they're going through something, and I wouldn't want to like single them out in any way possible, but probably like make comments around other students, say that saying like something like just as a group instead of single somebody out, and say guys, don't forget, if there's anything you guys need, just I'm an email away, whatever you guys need to talk about. Anything you guys need to like help understand or material or whatever. It's not to like, I don't want to just like single anybody out. I wouldn't want to do that. It just want to create something more like an open door policy type of thing during especially now, since like there's not much face-to-face stuff, but at least just like as a group, just say, hey, don't forget, if you guys have any issues or stuff going on, I'm still an email away. Just I wouldn't want a certain student to feel like they were being targeted or anything, in that aspect at least.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely hear you there, Aaron. So thank you for sharing. And I think that is a very reasonable and perfectly appropriate response, depending on the behavior, for sure. If there's a student that is again engaging in those low level behaviors or something, being overly demanding, kind of referring back to what are the expectations in the classroom, things like that, for sure, that might be a very appropriate response. And then Maureen put in the chat that, she had experienced a student like this in the past, and that she made a care team referral, and she let the student know about that referral and that some additional resources essentially were going to be on the way. And I think that that's a really perfect thing also that you can do. But one thing I think it's important to highlight is, we want to create that open environment, certainly, but I don't think that open environments and friendly environments are void of expectations. So this is really where your syllabus, your ICRs come into play, and then continually reinforcing that. And so I know some of you may be asynchronous or synchronous, depending on the circumstances of your class, but in any opportunity that you can to reemphasize those expectations for students on the proactive side, it's important. And then when those expectations aren't being met, then highlighting those clearly for the student, because students don't know, or people don't know what's wrong. They don't know that they're not supposed to do something until you tell them it's wrong. I'm sure any of our parents in the room would know that that is true, that you got to call out that kind of stuff sometimes. And so I think it's really important, if it's verbally and you tell the student verbally that, posting your discussion posts in XYZ fashion or utilizing curse words is outside the expectations of that classroom. Verbally, I would always follow it up with an email. We have draft emails that we can provide you, kind of like a behavioral contract in a way, if you would like that. But then also, you could also just do it in an email, especially when things are a little less face-to-face and interactive right now. Sometimes you may come upon these things after they've happened in posts or essays or things like that. If the behavior, especially in environments, if you're on a video conference call with your students working through some lectures and there's a student who is continually disruptive to the educational environment, whether in person or on Teams, you're perfectly within your realm as an instructor to ask them to leave in that singular incident. This isn't, unfortunately, you don't have the authority to say you're out of my class forever, because if there's a situation where a student's going to be deprived of their ability to access education, like attend the rest of the semester for a particular course, we have a lot more legal obligations that we have to provide to them, like due process and such. And some of you may have a different program, like I know sign language or some of our other academic programs have a little bit different situation because they have behavioral contracts based on professional standards. But you're definitely welcome in those singular incidents. If a student's behavior persists to the point where it is disruptive to you and the educational environment, you can ask them to leave that particular course. Again, make sure you always follow up in writing, because that puts it in writing. If it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And so specifying for them what the behavior was that you expect, what you observed, what the new expectations are, how long they have to correct that behavior, and then what the consequences would be should they continue engaging in that behavior, like a referral to the student conduct process or, what have you. If it's possible, you can discuss reasons that they think that the behavior has occurred. Because that also might give a little bit insight about what resources may be best applicable. Sometimes I know that's a little more difficult, but definitely make sure you document though, document. Call us at the care team, and then always submit that care team report as well. And we can provide, like I said, those templates. So talking about that last little behavior, the very, very tip of that behavioral pyramid is threatening behavior. And these are typically things that leave us feeling frightened or in fear for our safety or the safety of others. So this is kind of that high level, really rare situation, but it can happen. Some examples are direct threats. If there's a suicide attempt, or if maybe there's a high level physical confrontation when we're back in person, or if you're on campus and you observe one, if a student displays a weapon, or if a student's referring to homicide and harming others as a solution. Those are all things that are definitely not appropriate, cause a lot of fear and concern, and definitely would require a very quick and immediate response. So what would you all say is something that you should do if you encounter threatening behavior? Protect yourself, absolutely. So Daniel said, protect yourself. Maureen said, campus police. Absolutely. I think these are all wonderful and smart things that you can do and should do in those situations. If you can de-escalate the situation, you should definitely attempt to do that, because that's the goal. But at the end of the day, it's also about, like Daniel said, protecting yourself and protecting the community. And so, you know, you have to be the arbiter of what you feel is your best, safest way to do it. But at the end of the day, like, our police force is trained to be that immediate response when there's a concern. And so definitely contacting them is always going to be the best option. And especially if it's a threat, you know, active shooter, display of weapons, all of that stuff, they're going to be your point of contact. But also, this is if it's self-injurious. So if a student discloses that they attempted or are going to attempt suicide, notifying the police is really important, because the police can actually conduct wellness checks and send officers from the local police departments to that individual's address to check on them. What I will say is, if you need questions or guidance in those situations, you're welcome to contact us. But, you know, contacting the police is going to be your best bet right off the bat, because they can alleviate the concerns. Then once everyone and the situation is safe and de-escalated, we would want that care team report again, so that we can follow up on it and figure out what we do to continue protecting the health and safety of our community. Geronimo, is there anything that you want to add so far?
You're doing great.
Oh, thank you. Make sure you say that louder for Dr. Amon.
Dr. Amon, he's doing great. And that's a diagnosis, not an opinion.
Just a diagnosis. So one thing I do like to emphasize is, because I think words matter and words are important, is there is a difference between disruptive and threatening behavior, like I said earlier. And so I wanted to specifically post some examples of that, because whatever emails we communicate, whatever reports we're submitting are, you know, become part of a student's educational record. And so we want to make sure we're being as accurate as possible. So while a student, and it's not appropriate for a student to post offensive comments in a chat or offensive images in their in classroom discussion board, anything like that, that is something that is definitely more disruptive versus threatening. If a student implies or makes a direct threat of harm to self or others, 100% considered threatening. If a student sends a disrespectful or a rude email to you all, at no point in time is what I'm about to say, does that excuse the behavior. And it does not mean that we won't respond, and it does not mean that we won't talk to that student about it, because we're also an educational environment and we're about setting students up for success. So while a behavior is off-putting and disrespectful and rude, and we can agree on all of those terminologies, you know, they insult you and call you an a-hole and tell you you're the worst teacher ever and you should be fired, that's not appropriate. We can have a conversation with the student about appropriateness and how to address our concerns, but that's not threatening. If a student indirectly or directly threatens your safety or you know, things of that nature, that would fall in that threatening category. But a student simply saying that you're the worst teacher ever and they want to talk to the dean, that would just be because at the end of the day, they do have the right as a student to talk to the dean if they so wish, because the dean sometimes falls as part of any type of procedure when addressing a grievance or a complaint. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that distinction there? I always like to highlight it in a presentation, because oftentimes when we're in referrals for these elevated situations, that's where things can get rubbed the wrong way, maybe sometimes between myself, you know, it's at no point in time are we devaluing your experience or devaluing how something made you feel, because we often would likely probably feel the same way had we been on the receiving end. Like Dr. Amon said, frustrating for sure, but it doesn't necessarily mean it falls into that threatening category. All Right. At the end of the day, our big summary to the last 45 minutes that we've talked with you is if it's enough to cause concern, that it's time to contact the care team. Because at the end of the day, if you feel funny about it, I promise you someone else will. And this student may also probably feel concerned or be engaging in these types of behaviors in other settings as well. And so we want to make sure that we're tracking those behaviors and getting support early and often, so that we can alleviate and avoid any of those elevated situations. When you do report, how you do that is you go to tccd.edu/incident report. That is our URL. It is all over the website. It's here. I'm going to put it in the chat. But that's where you would go to a care team report, a Title IX report, academic integrity report, or just a general student conduct report. And so make sure that you get those turned in there. When you do submit that form, it goes directly to the director of student conduct on the campus that you indicated it occurred, but it is copied to the entire care team. One thing I will say is some of you may be teaching multiple sections at multiple campuses. And so it's really important to focus on what is the campus that your section is affiliated with, because that will impact where it goes. And so, you know, for example, Maureen Dinner, I'm sorry I keep using you as an example. You're just like the first little box on my screen. But Maureen teaches on our Trinity River campus. But if she is maybe doing an adjunct position for our Southeast campus as well, if the incident or the concern with the student occurs in her Southeast course, even though she's primarily a TR teacher, she's going to want to submit that as a Southeast incident so that it gets routed to the appropriate staff members there. When you are documenting these experiences, please, please, please make sure that you remain objective. Make sure you remain detail-oriented and fact-based. Like Dr. Amen said, like I've said, certain situations are going to be incredibly frustrating for you and they may cause an emotional response. That is what the phone is for. And so if you are having a reaction to something and you just need to vent and get it off your chest, or you're not really sure with how to proceed in writing something objective and detailed and fact-based, I ask that you please call me before you submit it, and I will provide you with some guidance about what you should do. Because at the end of the day, we don't want the student to feel sold out, and sold out is bolded because we're in higher ed and it's an acronym and we love acronyms. So it means stereotypes, speculations, opinions, labels, or diagnoses. So stereotypes, I'm pretty sure that we all know what that means, but we want to avoid applying any type of assumption on to a situation. I like to use really dramatic examples because I think they sell a point home. But one example would be way back when I worked on a residential campus, there was an individual who encountered a student. It was more adversarial reaction than probably it needed to be. But when that individual submitted the report, they stereotyped the student because the student was African American. And they said that, I know, you know, African Americans don't have good interactions with people in authority, and so that's probably why they were confrontational with me. That's a huge red flag, wildly inappropriate, and definitely could have been left off. And so we don't want to do those types of stereotypes. We don't want to speculate either. So speculate why a student is choosing to do certain things. So like, oh, the student emailed me this. I think it's because their mom just passed away. I think you can put in there those facts. You know, the student's mom passed away. And they've expressed frustration in the past, but we don't want to try to speculate and make connections between things if they haven't been explicitly made. Opinions, again, opinions, this may be more appropriate for a phone call if you really feel it's necessary, but opinions about how you think the student should have behaved in a given situation. So, you know, student did XYZ, but I think that they should have done XYZ. Or opinions about how you believe the care team or the office should respond. So I believe that you need to do X, Y, Z, because at the end of the day, that may not be the most appropriate response. And so we want to not set an expectation that we're not going to meet because it may not be appropriate. Labels, again, if a student hasn't identified with a particular label, it's best to leave it off. You know, we can think of things in terms of gender identity, or ethnicity in this situation, and then diagnoses. Let's leave that to the professional. Diagnose if someone is clinically depressed or if someone is an alcoholic, things of that nature. If the student hasn't explicitly said, you know, I am clinically depressed or I have anxiety, let's not put in there that that is the assumption of what they are experiencing or what is there, because we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. And in terms of the body of it, include date, time, location if you can. If you can remember verbal exchanges, definitely put those in there, because those are super helpful. Because if we're having to follow up, especially if it's one of those disruptive confrontational experiences, it's really great when I can just say, did you say X, Y, Z? And then avoid catastrophizing. This is a word that is made up, but it's important to avoid it. And what that means is only giving you the worst of the worst situation and withholding the good. And an example of that would be if maybe we got a report one time that said students said they were suicidal. That is at the top of our threat assessment. So that requires an immediate high level response. And so all of these wheels start turning, all of these levers start getting pulled in order to figure out how we respond to create a safe situation. And then in some additional follow-up, as those levers are being pulled, it's determined that there was more to the story. The student shared with the individual that referred it that they were suicidal 5 years ago, but they've overcome that for now. They still have moments in where they are experiencing downs, but they're connected to a counselor weekly. They're really excited about transferring, yada, yada, yada. So those are two different responses from our team. And so it's important to put anything and everything, including if you've made the student aware that the report is being submitted or if you've already shared certain resources. Any questions there? Awesome. So when you go to the report, when you go to that tccd.edu/incident report, it brings up this screen here, and I also have the link to it. So what I want y'all to see is when you go to this incident report form, it gives you information about, you know, if it's an emergency, please call the police. It tells you which individual is working on which campus so that you can contact them. But then down here on this form where it says nature of this report, when you click this drop-down menu, it allows you to make the selection between care team, academic, general conduct, or Title IX. So make sure that you are selecting the appropriate one here, because that dictates who the report gets sent to and who it's copied to. This is mostly important when distinguishing between the care team and Title IX. That seems to be the default of most of our faculty is in our staff, honestly, is to just send everything to the care team, which is not inappropriate or wrong, but specifically when it comes to things of Title IX, so sexual misconduct, dating violence, domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, sexual harassment, you're mandated by law to report that to the Title IX coordinator. And if you select care team, the report does not get copied to the Title IX coordinator, it gets copied to the care team members. If you select Title IX, it gets copied to them. It is something that we can fix behind the scenes. And so at the end of the day, it's not like the end of the world, and it's not something that is going to inhibit our ability to serve our students. But it is an important distinction because we want to make sure that we're meeting our reporting obligations as early as possible. And so just distinguishing between those two is key. It gives you a little helpful hint over here that if you're unsure of what category it falls into, you can scroll down below. And we actually put some examples of behaviors within each category, so it gave you a little more context. So right here is where you would add the student's information. Make sure you always add the ID. That's definitely the thing that we need. And then also then put in a narrative here. So you would type any and all details, including if you've had already conversations with the individual, if they're aware of the reports being submitted, were any emergency personnel contact, and then you can also attach documents here. So that's the report. And then this, I just wanted to show it to you. We're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but NBITA stands for the National Behavioral Intervention Team Administration. It's a national organization that oversees and provides guidance in this realm. Everything from risk assessment in sporting events to behavioral intervention to now they've moved into the corporate environment and things of that nature. So I promise you, Geronimo and Dr. Amon and I and our other care team members, we're not just making this up as we go and deciding, you know, how we feel for the day on what's the best course of action. We're evaluating all the facts and figures that we have and putting them on this risk rating, which, you know, evaluates their risk to self, their risk to others, and then assigns a generalized risk. And then based on if they reach the mild, moderate, elevated, or critical category, we have a list of options that we can take in order to intervene and assist the student or de-escalate the behavior. So like I said, this isn't just something that we're making up on the fly. It's very structured and it's based on national best practice and research. Some final yeah.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Follow that through. I may jump.
Okay. Just some final considerations is just always try to avoid normalizing or rationalizing unusual behavior or ignoring it, because at the end of the day, it's about getting someone help. We do not put, every effort is made to respect the privacy of those individuals making referrals and who the referrals are made about. So know that we're not putting a neon sign here that says that Matthew Morrison submitted this report that says that you're going through a difficult time. We typically just highlight, you know, your staff member let us know that you're going through a difficult time. The students can honestly usually make the connection pretty quickly because they understand who they've made disclosures to. But again, no one's really getting upset about this because it's about providing support and resources to the student. But one way to mitigate that concern, especially if you're just looking at some of those concerning behaviors at the very bottom of the pyramid, is letting the student know you're referring them for additional support. There's also tons of incidents where the student never knows that they're actually on our radar because we can pass resources and guidance back through the referral body or go around and provide intervention through indirect ways to not escalate the situation. And so that's where we may pull you in. You know, Kiana, if you submit a report for a student, we may say, hey, you seem to have a good relationship with this student. Can you pass along these resources? Let us know what their response is, provide you guidance throughout that entire program and that entire process. But that way they're on our radar, we're providing resources, and the student doesn't feel like their privacy's been compromised in any way. We only share information though with those that need to know in order to assess in reviewing the situation. And so just know that we're not out here blasting any of your information or the student's information. Your personal observations are not protected, but are not considered FERPA protected. What that means is you can share this information with us. And even if it is FERPA protected information like grades, attendance, stuff like that, you're operating within the role that's been designated to you as an individual at the institution. And it's seen as an educational need to know to help us understand the totality of situations. So if the grade has contextual value to the situation, it's not seen as violating FERPA to provide that context. But things that you see, things that you hear, things that you smell and observe, you know, the five senses, that is not FERPA protected information. At the end of the day, I'll just leave it with, if you focus on the top 2 or 3, that's really big, is, you know, become knowledgeable about campus services, give yourself permission to act, and go the extra mile. The earlier you refer, the earlier we start talking, the more assistance we can provide to students. This is a resource that if you're interested, sometimes the National Association does podcasts and like webinars once a month, and some of them are open to the general public. So if you're interested in learning more, you can always jump on one of those. I want to reserve the practice for first to see if Geronimo has anything he wants to add, if Dr. Amen has anything she wants to add because she's here, or if there are any questions that we can get answered in these last few minutes together.
I will have a small summary, the way that sometimes has been helpful to help people, which is, as you can see there, the 3 levels of behaviors we said, the concerning, disruptive, and threat. And you can consider them in 2 areas. One is the level of functioning. That can be academically, that can be socially, or personal in terms of how their lines of thought are, emotions regulate, or their own hygiene. And the other one is boundaries. You know, boundaries start with simple things as following the curriculum and deadlines and assignments. It doesn't have to be that complex. Every breakup of a boundary with level of functioning, it is a red flag. And you can see that as it goes up, you can see how easy it is to find that the level of functioning and the boundaries were broken when it comes to a threat or disruptive. The other element that is important as we consider is our own emotions, how we're responding to the student's behavior. We all come with our own background and experiences. And the key is this: you may be right on being concerned about the student's behavior, but we need to make sure that it's not our uncomfort with that behavior what's making us do the report, but it is the behavior itself, because the level of functioning or the boundaries that is being breaking are coming to a point where the student may need resources to cope with those skills and learn those skills and cope with the circumstances, or we may need to do a better intervention to be able to normalize the student, regulate their emotions, and give them clear guidelines of what to do, okay? One thing that sometimes happens is that when you are about to report something, you may have mixed emotions because you may realize that there were some boundaries that the student passed that you let them pass by, and now you're having mixed emotions of why did I did this? Listen, we're here to help. Our primary concern is to make sure that the student safety and the safety of the other people within the university and even the community are put first. We're not looking for what happened, we're looking at how to make it better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And finally, when you're writing, and I think Dr. Amen wrote a little bit, make sure that you put the context of the facts of what happened, because you know that context brings meaning to facts. If you wrote student was crying for 2 minutes out loud, we may be concerned, but if you put student was told they cannot enter the nursing program and was crying, that provides us a perspective of how to intervene. Both situations, the student may benefit from resources and skills, but how we intervene changes dramatically.
Absolutely. I think that is all so many good points that you made, Geronimo. So I really appreciate you providing those. Are there any, I know that we're 1 minute over, so are there any last minute questions or examples that we can provide to you all? I want to be respectful of time, so I know that I can hang out for a few more minutes and answer any questions. I did also put a breakout evaluation in the chat, so if you wouldn't mind making sure that you do that to help our team as we continue to move forward and progress. My contact information is on the screen, so if you want to take a screenshot or a photo of it real quick, so is Geronimo's. But if you go to just tccd.edu/care-team, that'll take you to our care team website that has all of the content on it and contact information as well. And absolutely, if any of you are interested in receiving a copy of this presentation, send me an email and I will email you a copy of the presentation, because I don't know that there's anything set up right now for us to like put it in a folder for you to access later. So if you want the presentation, send me an email. I'll happily share it with you so that you have that. Anything else? I'll also put my email in the chat just in case. And then on the tccd.edu/care team, that's where you can find the contact information for the Director of Student Conduct on your campus if you are not on the TR or Connect campus. And then that way you can also reach out to them if you have any questions or need guidance. Well, all righty. Well, I don't see any other questions in the chat, and I don't hear any. But if you have any questions, please, I'll hang out for a minute or two, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and just let you know that I hope that you have a wonderful semester. I know that this has been challenging for so many of us for so many different ways, and we're definitely here to support. So I appreciate your time and thank y'all so much.